I want us all to close our eyes and think about the space inside. Dancers call that space negative space. It's all the space that is known and yet is out of sight. This is more a space you can feel than a space you can see. This space is called potential. It holds the tension between all we know of ourselves and all that we are yet to find out. It rests between what one has done and what one can do. Take a deep breath in and release. You can now open your eyes. My name is Sheila Chukwulozie. Welcome to my talk, Who Heals the Healer. In the beginning, there was the Word, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. John chapter 1, verse 14 of the King James Version Bible. The Word is the instrument through which that realization is first noticed and eventually fully acknowledged. The Word, the first gene, the first genius, the genius, a word that has come to mean exceptional, but originally formed from the Latin word which simply means source. Genius, commonly seen as exceptional fruit, is actually innate root, attendant spirit, present from one's birth, innate ability or inclination. By the late 16th century, it became clear that genius isn't something earned by hard work. In fact, it's something earned by existence. This means that the locus of genius attends to the first principle of any democratic concept, which is that at the very least, we all come to be alive by our agency. And by that agency, we deserve a specific respect called dignity. So when did that change? When did genius leave the realm of the innate, and how did it find itself in the realm of the exceptional? And even more importantly, what does that have to do with healing? In 1498, a Portuguese sailor called Vasco da Gama landed his ship in Calicut, India. He was the first European to make the trip successfully, creating a direct sail route from Europe to either India, China, or Japan. As soon as he did that, the fortunes of indigo native to that region would begin to spin out of control. Indigo traveled from Southeast Asia into the Middle East, from which most probably, along with the spread of Islam, it moved into parts of Africa, eventually reaching the Americas during the transatlantic slave trade. By the mid-17th and 18th centuries, the French and the British had established extensive plantations in the West Indies. While the region was popularly known for sugar, coffee, and cotton plantations, the spread of indigo from India meant that it too began to be farmed across Jamaica, Barbados, Montserrat, Haiti, Guadeloupe, and Martinique. While high export duties hindered the crop's success in that region, other areas of indigo production were taking off. In 1738, the British officer and plantation owner George Lucas moved his family from Antigua to South Carolina. 6 years later, his 22-year-old daughter, Eliza Lucas, successfully cultivated indigo on the family's Wapu plantation. Over the course of the next 2 decades, South Carolina began exporting more than 1 million pounds of indigo to its colonial headquarters in England. with a portion we exported into the Dutch Republic, Germany, and other countries. American indigo production created such a spike in the demand for slaves that up to 60% of enslaved persons during the 1700s were shipped to South Carolina. Thanks to the declaration of the Winya Indigo Society, more than 70,000 Senegambian slaves were exported to South Carolina in the second half of the 18th century. These people were brought not just for physical labor, but also for their knowledge of indigo production. Why am I telling you this? Because only the smallest, most tender parts of the indigo plant are used to make a dye that became so precious it turned the world on its head. In the way indigo itself transforms from plant to dye, we find that the effect it has on the world begins with the effect it has on itself. Harvested in September, tender indigo leaves are crushed in a mortar in order to release a colorless molecule called indican. The glycosidic bond between indican and indoxyl is broken by the physical act of crushing or pounding the leaves. After the leaves have been crushed, the blue sediments are rolled into balls which can be stored for many, many years or transported efficiently. In order to be useful for fabric, the balls must be liquefied, and then the liquid must be made soluble to allow its fastening to the cloth. The process begins with the separation of leaves from the stalk, after which industrial fans blow the plants into the air such that the breeze flings the light leaves further from the heavier stalks, sorting the two parts separately. After the leaves have been spread out for a few days, they are stored in straw bags to dry. Several days later, the leaves are piled into a meter-high compost to form what is referred to as a bedroom. Every 5 to 7 days, the compost is watered and stirred carefully to make sure that air is in contact with all parts of it. Now, because tap water can contain chemicals, groundwater is added to the mixture instead. And as the fermentation occurs, ammonia gas is produced in the atmosphere, making the piles become darker and darker. Two temperature-regulating cylindrical straw objects, known as bozu in the Asian tradition, are then introduced into the center of the pile. As air temperature can reach as high as 60 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, the bozu store some of this heat and release it back into the air at night when it may become too cold for fermentation to proceed. When the temperature gets too low, straw mat blankets called futon are used to cover the moldy compost. Like a child, the compost must be carefully observed. If it is too hot or too cold, it won't ferment properly. Once fermented, the leaves must now be turned into liquid form for a dyeing process to occur. Ash lime, sake, and wheat bran are sometimes added to the vat to regulate the alkalinity required for the indigo white. Once the substance is liquefied, then begins the work of stirring to make sure that the fermented leaves do not settle at the bottom. Depending on the conditions of the water, the climate, the quality of the wood used for ash, or the mood of the bacteria present in the mixture, it takes a number of days before a thin skin called ainohana, the flower of the indigo, starts to form at the top of the vat, signaling that it is time for a second addition of lime. Every day, the bacteria in the vat are fed with ash lye and wheat bran. Once the flour in the vat reaches a certain stage, the dyer knows that it is time for the fabric to meet the fauna. When air comes into contact with the indoxil, oxidization turns the soluble liquid into dried, insoluble blue particles, so that what you see on the fabric at that point is bacteria that are no longer breathing. The blue cloth, once dried, becomes an exhibit of dead bacteria. This is precisely the genius of the indigo plant, that its most expensive value is its entire life cycle. As it was in the beginning, is now and ever shall be, world without end. This is the way of the spiral. This is the way of the self-eating snake, the Ouroboros. This is the way of the fractal. And this is the way of the first principle. What is the first principle? A first principle is a basic assumption that cannot be deduced any further. Over 2,000 years ago, Aristotle, who you might know, defined a first principle as the first basis from which a thing is known. René Descartes, the French philosopher and scientist, embraced this approach with a method now called Cartesian doubt, in which he would systematically doubt everything he could possibly doubt until he was left with what he saw as purely indoubtable truths. Elon Musk has also somewhat popularized this concept as an innovative thought process that can cross over from science into strategy. But because I'm tired, truly, I am tired of hearing about both Musk and Descartes, we must go into another time zone in the eastern parts of Nigeria, where the Igbo people have ruled themselves via first principle thinking for ages. In Igbo land, we have a saying, "Ụzụ amaghị etu esi akpụ ogene, ya na egbe anya n'odo." The blacksmith who does not know how to construct an ogene instrument should observe the tail of a kite. As you can see, these two are not the same. While a kite is often flat, an ogene must be hollow to produce sound. The Igbo people know this. However, they also know that beside 6 stands both 5 and 7. If you can reduce something into its most fundamental element, you will find that there are patterns essential to nature and therefore essential to life. Similarly, if you strip humans down to our most essential element, you may not find the same, but you may find the similar pattern that we share of taking in air and bringing it back out. Now, what does this have to do with healing? Healing as a concept is larger than the word itself. Unfortunately, medicine has become a synonym for pills. I don't know how this happened, but we are living in a world where we collectively believe that the only people capable of improving the condition of our health wear white lab coats. We have refused to break medicine down into all its divisible parts to find that its root word, mederi, means not only to cure or cut, but to remedy, to assuage, to comfort, and to amend. In his book, When Breath Becomes Air, Paul Calanthi often said that his medical training taught him to believe himself as Lord over his patient. He put himself in a position where he believed he was expected to know better than the patient about the body that belonged to the patient. The English word for doctor, however, is from the root word docere, which is to teach. However, this word has completely eclipsed the other forms of teaching that have developed outside the Greco-Roman world. By tying healthcare to notions of development, coloniality has sought to decenter and marginalize non-Western healing systems, writes Chidiume in his essay, Amidst the Clinical Dissonance. You see, medicine is beyond a packet that crinkles. Medicine is beyond the white stuff. If broken down, medicine is supposed to reflect that one's life was always worth living, rather than come to be the reason one lives. A long time ago, I heard of a group of women somewhere in West Africa who would listen to a person's grief 3 times. And once the story has been told the 3rd time, they walk the person to the ocean. And then they ask the person to go deep into the ocean and tell the ocean their story. Now, if the person decides to survive the depths of the ocean and return, then it means the person has chosen to stay with life and must therefore leave the old story with death in the middle of the ocean. For in retelling the story remains alive, and one may never be able to live beyond the old story. In my own personal life, I know a story that I've told myself, the story of being an invalid, which is a word that is used to describe people often seeking care in a hospital. In my own personal experience, I have seen pharmaceutical solutions leaving me with long-term side effects that are more dangerous than the original illness. As a dancer, my major instrument is my body. You see, performing is not just my career, it is my calling. So when I started feeling unable to show up for myself due to these unimaginable stomach pains, I was near depressed. So I saw a doctor who described me a suite of antibiotic pills that just left me feeling sicker and sicker. And on one fateful day, after I was given some more extensive tests and some more antibiotics to take, I just said, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I'd rather die than live like this. And so I threw everything in the bin. It took that much drama for me to remember that the first principle of pills is often plants. I found that aspirin is originally found in willow bark tree that also makes my face wash. Willow bark is responsible for what is called salicylic acid. It's the natural source. It's the first source. Quinine from the cinchona tree has been the primary treatment for malaria for centuries. Topical steroids for eczema are produced from yam or sisal, and manuka honey is gotten from bees who tap a strong antibiotic plant in New Zealand. I remember that I've seen people removing tapeworms with the same oil that was once claimed to be the unhealthiest fat to consume. Bitter cola has been the antidote to a lot of accidental poisoning around here. So much so that during my father's funeral, I was asked to carry bitter cola with me wherever I went for the fear of someone trying to poison me. It took me a while, but I realized that the people who live not only by the pill, but also by the food, aren't always the less educated or less civilized. Sometimes they are the ones living in the first principle, using their lives as living medicine, and watching their bodies respond to various organic compounds until they come to know themselves through the very ailment that once threatened to weaken their own selves. Sure, let's be real. This is also the reason why there's so many quack doctors wasting lives with hoaxes and questionable prescriptions to simple illnesses that can probably be solved by a dose of antibiotics. However, we have to be honest with ourselves and ask, is the history of Western medicine eternally faultless and flawless? Why is it that when we want to talk about alternatives to Western medicine, we always have to bring about the danger of meeting fraudulent people? There are fraudulent people everywhere. I just watched Painkiller, the Netflix show that basically showed how this company, this family, spent years basically packaging meth in a pill and serving it to people as a solution to their problems, knowing very well that it was actually just a ladder to more problems. In Igbo land, our version of a doctor is called a dibia. However, one of my earliest relationships with that word was when my mom was talking to her sister and she mentioned the word dibia. And I think it had to do with a family member of mine being one. And interested, I asked, "Oh, who is that?" And all of a sudden, everybody just, both of them are just like, "Oh, yeah, nothing. No, we didn't." And I was like, "But, I mean, I'm a child, but I'm not deaf." But it's interesting how that sparked so much discomfort in the room. Unfortunately, because religion and healing have often reinforced each other, think the Irish Catholic missionaries who controlled the nursing of Igbo soldiers during the Biafran War. Because religion and healing have often been this close to each other, it has also meant that the perspective of healing from an Igbo worldview has been demonized and denigrated along with its best solutions for locally specific ailments. This also means that where regulation and certification can solve the prevalence of fraudulent traditional healers, instead there is the instinctive disgust by the majority of Roman Catholic Igbos themselves who believe that traditional solutions are one, simply non-competitive to Western medicine, and two, sinful in the eyes of God. Though the topic doesn't end here, my talk must find one for itself. Disease is a word that explains itself. Once a soul is not at home in its body, it lives in dis-ease. For the body does not condone self-abandonment and self-dismemberment. The body does not allow what Ray Chow calls self-recognition through self-deletion. Think about it. If you had a friend that wouldn't speak to you in a language you both knew and understood, would you stay? Or would you decide, I need to leave because the person talking to me is not actually talking to me in a way I can understand? Because it's not always just about the data, but how the data is presented. Sometimes when we feed our bodies with food presented as pills that are hostile to us, the body cannot hear itself. And the same goes for the mind. If we continue to feed our mind overstimulations that make the body live in perpetual heat and misalignment and chaos, how do we expect to live in peace? Some of these problems can only be diagnosed by our own self-reflection. It is not in cleaning the mirror that we take the stain off our teeth. It is in licking our teeth with our tongue that we get to the root of that problem. As Chinua Achebe says, one cannot say he has dried his body if he cannot say where the rain began to beat him. We must find the healers in each of ourselves, for we live in our genes and our genius exists there. We must elevate them to the level of their rightful intelligence, for within our genes lie our greatest genius. Susie Kasim says it concisely. He who creates a poison also has the cure. He who creates a virus has the antidote. He who creates chaos has the ability to create peace. He who sparks hate has the ability to transform it to love. He who creates misery has the ability to destroy it with kindness. He who creates sadness has the ability to convert it to happiness. He who creates darkness can be awakened to produce illumination. He who spreads fear can be shaken to spread comfort. Any problems created by the left hand of man can be solved with the right. For he who manifests anything has the ability to destroy it. Thank you for listening.